Episode of the Infinite Franchisee Show. We are welcoming David. Hello, David.
Hey, April.
David, I'm so excited to share you with our audience. And to give you a little snippet of who David is, he embodies the Midwestern values of honesty and integrity in all aspects of life. He was born and raised in Indiana and got his first taste of business ownership by watching both parents build and operate successful businesses. David's career took him down an interesting path that allowed him to develop unique skills and expertise in sales, project management, operations, and finance. One of his most valuable career stops spanned over 6 years and included analyzing and underwriting franchise systems across the country in order to establish the right fit between the franchisor, franchisee, and finance company. He believes in wealth creation through business ownership and has owned or been partner in 7 different businesses over the years. He just recently, once again, completed the entire business cycle of analyze, purchase, build, and sell. In addition to managing his current franchise consulting practice, David and his wife invest in franchise and real estate assets. This very real firsthand experience offers insight and true understanding to your investigation. Welcome, David. So that was an
Thanks
awesome,
for having me.
awesome. Yeah, our pleasure. It was an awesome bio there that you provided, and I think what is really truly comes through is that you've been there, done that.
I think my career path is non-conventional if you're sort of the corporate America type, because I really focused on, rather than focusing on like climbing the ladder or getting the next promotion, I kept thinking, what is it that I want to learn about business in the next thing that I'm doing? That led me to bounce around a lot, which is not really good for climbing the corporate ladder, but it's pretty good for entrepreneurship. So it's worked out pretty good for me.
That is true. It's always interesting. I think it's interesting how many times the corporate world doesn't give credit to entrepreneurs, right? So if there's an entrepreneur going back into the corporate world, they're like, "Oh, you owned your own business, so you created your own titles, and nothing you did holds any credibility or water." And it's like, most of you corporate individuals would have a tough time in small business ownership.
It's yes, it's fun and exciting, um, and challenging. Um, so
Oh, 100%. So now, obviously, you've taken all of that experience, rolled it into an amazing business where you help others really navigate finding the right business for them, which is, in my experience, for our clients, that's actually usually the first mistake people make is they just pick the wrong business to own. So I think you're doing a great service. Have you found that people's first instinct sometimes is not the best match for them ultimately?
um, yes, I think part of the reason I got into this franchise consulting role is I learned some things in when I was financing franchise brands, right? Franchisees. And one story that stands out to me, I think really articulates your point. Um, this woman, Sarah, she just was hell bent that the world needs something other than Starbucks. She hated Starbucks coffee, too bitter, too dark, too strong. So she bought a Hawaiian coffee franchise. And she loved Hawaiian coffee, that Kona coffee. It's real smooth and buttery and not real. Well, the world needs something other than Starbucks was her mantra. And she was serious and passionate about coffee and passionate about owning a business, whatever. So we financed her store, and we financed her store in about late 2007. So by about 2009, the financial meltdown of 2008 and the recession that corresponded with that, she was done and closing up shop. And I said, Sarah, I remember you. Do you remember The world needs something other than Starbucks. And she was like, yeah, it does. And I was like, well, what happened? And she was like, I never wanted to work on Sundays, and I hate high school kids. And I thought to myself, wow, every coffee shop has high school kids serving coffee. Like, how do you buy a coffee shop and not want to have, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's like saying you don't want to have, you're dying to own a Chick-fil-A, but you don't want to have high school kids to manage. That's crazy talk. And so that, I think, is what people, they focus on the widget. They focus on whether it's a pizza or a fitness workout or I can't tell you how many F45 franchise lovers wanted to buy an F45 because their workout was so good. I was like, well, what does that have to do with owning the business? You know what I mean? Like, um, let's talk about the business characteristics, which is the direction that I take people, and really get them to focus individually on those characteristics so that they can think it through. Like, managing high school kids is different than managing massage therapists. We owned a massage studio. The good massage therapists are, mid to 20s to mid 30s. They're not 18. And so that managing that employee is much, much different. I ran a foundry, heavy manufacturing. Those employees are quite different than massage therapists, right? So understanding who your employee is, and do you want to be around them all the time? Do you like that kind of character, right? That kind of employee. That makes a huge difference with whether or not you like the business or not, right? And that has nothing to do with the profitability, which is a whole nother area that we try to break down for them. So,
Right. Yeah, you're speaking to exactly what I've seen happen, which is many times people really latch on to what they're passionate about, right? She was, your example, Sarah, extraordinarily passionate about coffee and about bringing something alternative to the world with coffee. And, but the model was not a good fit for her. Now, does that mean she couldn't have found something in the world of coffee to be excited about and to own as a business that would have allowed her to get away from those high school students? She could have. Maybe she would go into coffee manufacturing, right, or packaging, or she could have had a plant like that and maybe been very fulfilled and got it into distribution and grocery stores, and even felt like she was making a bigger impact than through just a local coffee shop. But people tend to go with what they know, and what she knew was, I go into a Starbucks, that's my only option to get my personal cup of coffee, and I hate it, and I want to change that one thing. And I think that's what young business owners do. Is one, they're not really equipped to even think big enough or to be well educated on all the ways that they could address their passions and their dreams and be a successful business owner, which is what you help them do.
that's exactly right. I think when you really start with what you're trying to accomplish, what's your long-term goal? Let's start with that and then back into what brand facilitates that. What business model, first of all, then what industry segment, and then what franchise brand, and then what's the widget, right? Because if you love pizza, there's 10, 15 franchise brands that sell pizza. You know what I mean? So we can cut it, we can look at it from multiple different angles. And by the way, if you love pizza, I wouldn't show you 5 pizza franchises to compare. I would show you one pizza franchise and compare that to a fitness franchise, to compare that to, a painting franchise, so that you can really get a sense for, what are the different, what does it look like to own a painting franchise, to be the owner. Like, you're not painting houses if you own a painting franchise, right? Just like you're not teaching fitness classes when you own a fitness concept. So what does that owner's role look like? And I really want people focusing on that, because that's what you're going to be doing.
What I find, David, is that most people, because they're coming from being an employee, generally, the first time business owner is breaking away from, being an employee of someone else, that many times they cannot grasp the owner's role because they're so used to doing. They're so used to being the executioner that when they actually envision what it would be like to own the coffee shop, they're envisioning, I'm going to be the person who's handing each person the cup of coffee and saying, now this is better than Starbucks, right? I'm going to be spreading my message and helping people adopt my point of view, right? I'm going to have that direct impact. And what they're picturing in their minds is the running of the day to day, the operating the business. And they may not even have a context for managing people before. They may not have a context for ever having delegated anything to anyone else. I mean, even within their own household. I mean, if you're a woman, shoot, doing every job in the house many times. Not to knock men, but we all know it's true. So so I think that that getting an education about what business ownership is and what it can be, because there's a large spectrum, is so beneficial before you end up investing what for many people is their entire life savings and their retirement into their business venture.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was actually just talking to a candidate this morning about, making sure that he's at the closing the to getting close to the decision point. And so we were just kind of going through a checklist. Do you understand your pro forma? Have you done a best middle case, worst case scenario? Where are the gaps of information, and what are the questions that you need to get more granular on, et cetera? And so we ended up talking about one of his questions had to do with customer acquisition and sort of longevity of customer and things like that. These are all the things that I kind of coach people on. And we started talking about, he was very clear on what the ramp up period looks like, because I emphasize that speed to break even, cash flow positive. What does that look like in terms of revenue and things like that? But he was fuzzy on what years 3, 4, 5, 6 look like, because it's an emerging brand and they don't have a lot of track record, right? Which happens with an emerging brand if you want to get in early, et cetera. So you have to be conscious of that. But they had a founder business that had been around for 20 years. And I said, well, get on the founders call, because all emerging brands have that, right? And your questions want to be around years 4, 5, and 6 as it relates to what is the growth trajectory in year 4, and is that different than year 2? Because some businesses ramp really fast and you grow super quick, but then they plateau and flatten out. And if you have the assumption that you're going to grow 20 or 30% every year for 5 to 10 years, you're kidding yourself, right? And so that was what I wanted him to focus on, is what does that curve look like? And these are the kinds of questions that you want to ask. And this is the person that you're going to get that good information from. And so really that's my role as a coach, is to guide and direct what are the right kinds of questions that you want to be asking, and who are you going to get that information from.
Yeah,
So
that's so important. And I find too that many of the resources that are out there for franchise due diligence and the questions you should ask a franchisee and a franchisor, they're very much cookie cutter, right? It's like, okay, ask the franchisees these things about the financials, or the operations, and ask the franchisor this. I like to kind of try to peel back the curtain and really I like to talk to my clients about the questions that you're not listening for the answer, you're listening for what they're not saying, right, in answer to the question. Because that's where sometimes you'll get your best information, in part because you don't know what you don't know, really. So many times, if you're just asking the question and listening to the answer itself, you're so focused on what you think you know that you're missing all the nuances of what isn't being said. Um, so I think that that can be very
that's such a
valuable.
good point. Yep, that's a very good point. And similarly but different, one of the things that I coach my candidates on, so validation is talking to franchise owners, right? To validate or verify what the franchise salesperson is telling you. And one of the things that I coach my candidates on is find out how long they've been a franchisee and what they did before they were a franchisee. And really what we're getting at is, who am I talking to? What is the lens of the information that I'm getting from? Because, and I always use these two characters. They are actual candidates that I've worked with. A rocket scientist from Lockheed Martin literally put rockets on the moon, sent rockets up to the outer space and back. And the vice president of Anheuser-Busch beer salesman, right? So if you're talking to a rocket scientist, you're going to get a lot of data centric answers to your questions, right? And data analytics and whatever. And so if you know that that guy's a rocket scientist, then you can gather that information through a lens and not be like, man, I hate spreadsheets. And if the only way to be successful in this business is to have a bunch of spreadsheets, I don't want to do it. Wait a second, you're getting your information from us. And conversely, if you're talking to a beer salesman, his answers are going to be probably very customer centric and making sure the customer's having a good time. And why? Because he sells beer for a living, right? Or he used to. And so when you understand the person that you're talking to and how that translates into the information about how they run their business, now you've got some context for how you might run that business, not being the exact same thing. If that, so I think really getting them to get a clear picture to see themselves running that business the way that they may run it is really critical to helping them become an educated buyer for them. Because this is all about that candidate and helping them be as successful as they can be.
That's such a good point. And both of your examples are highly educated and successful people before they come into franchise ownership. And I think that that's something to be taken into consideration as well, because when I hear VP of sales, I know that that person has gone through immense professional development to make it to VP of sales. They have learned how to manage teams, motivate teams, hold teams accountable, drive sales, drive results in as far as people. When I hear about the rocket scientist, I'm thinking, have they ever had that professional development in regards to people, or has it been more um, product, right? You like getting it to work, making sure that there isn't a gap in the performance, right? And performance of the actual product and item. And regardless of which way you go, what I think is so interesting is that the majority of first time franchisees, if you're coming from being an employee for someone else and not an executive, you're going to have a very wide degree of professional development. And many times you are told, ask the top franchisees what they're doing and try to replicate that. That's how you'll be successful. And I think that that misses the mark because it doesn't factor in the mindset and the perspective that that top franchisee is implementing and executing those items with, because many times the top franchisees are just actually operating mentally at a different level than someone who hasn't had all that professional and personal development on top of their skill set. And so I think like that's something that doesn't get talked about enough in regards to people need to be prepared to evolve through business ownership and become and reach their full potential, which requires looking in the mirror, and it requires getting help and all things internal, not just external. Do you find that that's a bit of misconception people have, is that they come in and think, okay, all I have to do is buy the business and then, everything's going to fall in line. I mean, I know you do a lot to dissuade that viewpoint, but do they come to you with that viewpoint?
Um, yes. One thing that I've sort of developed in my practice, I call the franchise promise, which is just a label that I put on it in pulling this idea out of people. I've done this for over, I think this is my 12th or 13th year as a franchise consultant. I've worked with thousands of people, and I always ask them, why a franchise? Why do you want to buy a franchise? Why wouldn't you just buy somebody else's business, and fix it or whatever? Um, and the answers always kind of come out. There's a very similar series of answers: proven model, having a track record of success, marketing and branding is figured out, et cetera, et cetera. And really the thought process that comes out of that is all franchises are the same. All I have to do is buy a franchise, any franchise, and I will get all of these things that I think that I want to receive from the franchise system or the franchisor, ongoing support, that kind of stuff. And the reality is franchisors are remarkably different. Some franchisors are develop a very fantastic system or proven business model, and some franchisors have a very fantastic support structure at the corporate office where they support and help their franchisees and answer all their questions and coach them really well. Some franchise brands do both. Some franchise brands do neither. Some franchise brands do a terrible job. They have a very flimsy business model and terrible support structure. But how would you know the difference if you're talking to a great salesperson? So, what I want my candidates to focus on is, what is the franchise system that you've created that you're expecting me to buy? And I want you to think of that like the franchise fee. You're paying a franchise fee. So think of that as the business model that you're buying. And then every month you got to pay royalties. And so I want you to think about that as the support that the franchisor is giving you that you're paying for. And if you're not getting very good support, then maybe the royalty is not worth it. Or if you don't have a very good franchise system and it's not identifiable what that system is, then maybe the franchise fee isn't worth it. But that's your job, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate. You have to determine, is the value proposition strong enough to be part of the franchise? And for a lot of people, the answer is yes. And for a whole lot of people, the answer is not. And that's totally fine with me. I want you figuring that out before you're a franchisee, right? I want you to be happy as a franchisee. And not all franchises are the same. And I would say the same thing about franchise consultants, by the way. There are a lot of people out there that are franchise consultants. And the analogy that I use is really my experience with my realtor. There's a ton of people that are realtors. Some realtors make millions of dollars selling real estate every year because they run a real business and they're very, very sophisticated at negotiating real estate deals and getting a very good deal for their people, et cetera. And there are a lot of real estate realtors out there that show houses on the weekend. And I do not think those two people are the same, right? Franchise consulting is not much different. There are people out there that call themselves matchmakers and we're the eHarmony of franchising. I think that's hogwash. Take a disc profile and I'll put you into a franchise and that's all you need. That's ridiculous. Like you have to know a lot about owning a business to guide people and coach people to become actually educated on whether or not they're making that good decision. So, not all franchises are the same. Not all consultants are the same. Get good at asking good questions and you'll end up with the right ones.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And people may not know that you actually don't have to pass any test, or there's no license for franchise consultants. There's no required continuing education. Now, if you do it legitimately through a company or even a franchisor, many franchise consulting umbrella companies are actual franchisors and their consultants are franchisees of that franchise. Obviously, in certain systems, there are credits that you have to meet. You have to have a certain number of classes and things like that. But literally, somebody off the street could just say, you know what, I'm going to start selling franchises. And they could do it. So
Yep.
that's such a good point. You have to do your homework both at the beginning of the process when picking your consultant and then through your consultant when picking your franchise.
Absolutely. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the reason that you want to be part of a franchise is because you want their knowledge support. You want that leverage point in they know what they're doing and they're going to teach me how to do it, right? And that is also the reason that you might use a franchise consultant is they've actually been there and done that. And so they're going to help me do it. And shortening my learning curve is a concept that I talk a lot about, right? That's the value. Leverage, in my opinion, is the value of being part of any franchise. But how strong is that lever? Right? Some levers are really, really short and some are really, really long, right? So you want a long one.
Well, I love what you're doing, David, because you're truly making a difference when probably it matters most. If you can really help someone elevate their thinking, choose the right franchise, or choose that franchising isn't right for them at all, and be set up with the right expectations going in as to how what it's going to take to grow this business and what they can expect during the growth of the business, then that person is already starting out with a much more significant chance of success than the person who is not getting that education beforehand. So that's why you're on our podcast, is because what you do is so in alignment with what we believe is needed in the franchising industry on behalf of franchisees.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I really appreciate that. And honestly, that's why I got into this gig in the first place. I saw a lot of when lending money to small businesses, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about single unit economics. I learned about what businesses make money, which ones don't, how much money do they make, etc. Now, I don't talk about that with any of my candidates because that's not really the point. But understanding how businesses can be successful and what are the pitfalls, and also seeing business owners and how hard they work, and some were wildly successful and some were wildly unsuccessful. So if I can do just a little bit on the front end before you spend any time, money, or energy trying to build a business, to guide you into one that has a higher likelihood of success because you've actually asked the right kinds of questions, I can feel good about that. I can lay my head on the pillow and you know does it work for everybody? Not really. It doesn't. But business ownership isn't easy. And as a colleague of mine said, we're playing a big boys game, and business ownership isn't easy. So I'm very candid with my candidates about that. Like, what we're trying to do here is difficult. That's why most people don't do it. Now, the rewards are fantastic, and it's an absolute blast. And I'll talk about that too, because that's true also.
Well, that's awesome. So, David, if our listeners would want to get in touch with you to talk to you about assisting them with their next franchise purchase, how would they do that?
The easiest thing to do is shoot me an email. David@franchiseyourfreedom.com is my email, and my website is franchiseyourfreedom.com.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. You are a wealth of knowledge, and we love that you are out there fighting the good fight for franchisees.
Thank you for having me on the show, April. It's been a blast.